Beneath the Grand Canyon, two very different kinds of memory converge. A set of oral traditions held by the Hopi for generations, and a pair of newspaper articles printed in April 1909 that described an extraordinary underground discovery. Today we examine both accounts side by side, what each source claims, what evidence supports or contradicts those claims, and what it would mean if they were pointing to the same place. We do this with curiosity, but also with care and respect for the people whose stories we are discussing. For the Hopi, the idea of an underworld is not a romantic hypothesis or a sensational headline. It is woven into a living cosmology. Hopi teachings speak of emergence, a movement from below to the surface, and a small specific site called the Sipapu, an opening that marks the passage into the present world. Certain clans hold custodial responsibilities for aspects of that history. Among these is the Bear Clan, which preserves an account of beings often called the Ant People, subterranean helpers who, in Hopi memory, sheltered ancestors during times of great upheaval. These are not simply mythic props. They function as cultural memory, identity, and moral instruction. To treat them merely as folklore would be to miss how central they are to the Hopi sense of place and past. The Arizona Gazette, a newspaper in Phoenix, published a striking story on April 5, 1909, and followed with another piece on April 9th. According to the articles, an explorer identified as G.E. Kincaid, allegedly connected to an expedition involving a Professor S.A. Jordan, entered a cliffside opening in the Grand Canyon, accessible by boat. Inside, the report claimed, lay a labyrinth of chambers stretching over 1,000 feet, lined with artifacts, pottery, baskets, preserved food stores, copper implements, mummified seated remains, and statues whose style the journalist suggested looked old world. The story also described inscriptions carved into stone. It promised one of the most sensational archaeological finds in the American West. Then, after the two articles, the public trail went cold. No photographs made public, no formal excavation reports, no catalogued artifacts in institution collections, and no substantiated follow-up from the named institutions. We must be clear from the outset. The Arizona Gazette articles are print sources that require corroboration. The newspaper reported what it reported. It claimed an attribution to Kincaid and to a Professor Jordan. Those claims were not backed by publicly verifiable Smithsonian files that we can locate today. When researchers have queried institutional records, the Smithsonian's holdings do not show a confirmed association with the Kincaid-Jordan expedition as described in the articles. Museums and major academic departments that would ordinarily have recorded such an expedition or accessioned its finds show no matching public trace. That absence does not automatically mean the newspaper invented everything, but it does mean we cannot treat the extraordinary assertions in the articles as established archaeological fact. To understand whether the Hopi account and the newspaper story might point to the same phenomenon, it helps to set out, carefully and respectfully, what each source claims and how each tradition functions as a form of evidence. Hopi oral history operates on timescales that are different from written archives. A story preserved by a clan is transmitted through ritual performance, teaching, and community life. It is not organized like a museum ledger. Oral tradition can carry information about landscape, social memory, and events across centuries. It can also embed moral meanings, cosmological frameworks, and symbolic language. The Bear Clan's account of Ant People, as described by Hopi elders, includes particular features: small, sometimes hairy beings who provided shelter and sustenance during catastrophic events. That account is tied to sanctioned custodial practices and to the Hopi obligation to protect certain sacred sites. Those duties are not incidental. They shape how Hopi people interact with and disclose their history. The Arizona Gazette story, by contrast, appears in the format of early 20th century journalism: flourish, claim, and appeal to the marvel. Its details are vivid and specific in ways that invite verification. An entrance claimed to be reachable only by boat. The presence of preserved grain and pottery, copper tools and mummified seated figures, statues resembling old-world art. These are testable assertions if the objects or photographs exist, and if institutional records corroborate the expedition. The articles themselves are primary sources for the history of public discourse in 1909. They tell us what was being said in print that year. They do not, however, stand in for archaeological confirmation. What follows is an attempt to balance three types of evidence: Hopi oral tradition, the Arizona Gazette reportage of 1909, and the discipline-driven expectations of archaeology and geology. Each contributes a different perspective, and each comes with its own rules of verification. Let us look more closely at the Hopi side. Hopi emergence narratives place great significance on the Sipapu, often represented in Hopi Katsina imagery and songs. The Sipapu is both physical and symbolic, an opening in the earth marking ancestral passage and renewal. The Bear Clan maintains custodial knowledge about certain elements of this history, including a story of ant people. Hopi elders who have shared the ant people account in recent decades describe beings who sheltered ancestors in underground chambers during times when surface conditions were dangerous. Details vary with teller and context. In some versions, these helpers were small and hairy. In others, they are described less physically and more functionally, as protectors and providers of secret knowledge and resources. Importantly, Hopi tradition treats these stories as part of communal continuity. Some elements are considered sacred and not to be publicly disclosed. Others are taught within clan contexts. Because the Hopi narrative is transmitted within community controls, it is not structured to accommodate outside demands for archaeological provenance. That means that, from an external perspective, the Hopi account resists being read as a literal field report with coordinates, stratigraphic measurements, and a serial catalogue number. To insist that it be translated into that language risks erasing the story's cultural functions. At the same time, we should not dismiss Hopi recollections as mere allegory or just myth. For the Hopi, these stories anchor identity and connect present communities to specific landscapes. When Hopi elders use place names or describe underground shelters, those references are embedded in long-standing relationships to the land. In short, the Hopi account is both a claim of knowledge about the landscape underneath the canyon and a living set of obligations about confidentiality and respect. Now consider the April 5th and April 9th, 1909 Arizona Gazette pieces. They read, in aggregate, as dramatic field reporting. The journalist attributed the discovery to G.E. Kincaid, who was said to have been affiliated with an expedition that included a Professor S.A. Jordan. The articles described a narrow entry in a sheer cliff, reachable only by boat, leading into passages and chambers lined with artifacts, baskets, pottery, seed stores, as well as metallic tools and mummified seated burials. They further suggested that some of the carved figures and inscriptions bore a visual resemblance to Old World forms, implying in the imagination of the time connections that would rewrite regional prehistory were they verified. But the factual trail from that point fragments. Researchers seeking evidence of Kincaid's expedition in institutional archives have encountered no clear accession records, no manuscript field notes attributed to him lodged in the Smithsonian's public catalogues, and no verified photographs or artifacts linked to the alleged find. The Gazette's claim that interested scholars at the Smithsonian were involved has not been substantiated in available institutional documents. After those 2 April articles, public mention of the discovery dwindles. The story did not, as one might expect a genuine major archaeological find to do, generate a sustained museum display, peer-reviewed reports, or extensive correspondence preserved in public archives. That absence is striking, but it is also ambiguous as evidence. Why might such an absence exist? There are several cautious possibilities worth considering. One possibility is that the Arizona Gazette embellished or fabricated the story, what we would call a hoax or sensational journalism, perhaps to sell papers or to align with a period fascination with spectacular finds. Another possibility is that records did exist at one time, but were lost, miscatalogued, or remain uncatalogued in private or institutional collections. Early 20th century expeditionary work sometimes produced messy archival footprints. Materials were occasionally distributed informally to private collectors, and institutional record-keeping was not uniformly rigorous. A third possibility is that the person named in the article, Kincaid, was real and made a discovery, but that the attribution to the Smithsonian or to Professor Jordan was erroneous or exaggerated. Each of these possibilities carries different implications. None can be confirmed with the surviving public record alone. When historians have assessed the Arizona Gazette story, opinions diverge. Some historians treat the articles with skepticism, pointing out the lack of corroborating evidence and the sensationalistic media culture of the time. Others caution against dismissing the account outright on the basis of missing records alone, arguing that archival silence is not definitive proof of fabrication. Responsible scholarship, therefore, keeps multiple hypotheses open while demanding that extraordinary claims be held to commensurately strong standards of evidence. To ground the discussion further, we should consider geology and cave science in the Grand Canyon region. The rock formation cited most often in discussions of potential subterranean spaces in the canyon is the Redwall limestone. Limestone, in general, is prone to the development of caves through a process called solutional karst formation. Slightly acidic groundwater dissolves the rock along fractures, creating voids, passageways, and sometimes elaborate cave systems. In the Grand Canyon, vertical cliffs, alcoves, and pocketed ledges create a complex interplay of sunlight, moisture, and rock strata. Many cave entrances are concealed in cliff faces or hidden behind overhangs. Some are accessible only at low water by boat, while others require technical descent or specialized climbing. The existence of inaccessible or underexplored hollows in the Redwall and adjacent formations is a geological fact. That reality creates space for the plausible existence of chambers or shelters that escaped early explorers' notice. But geological plausibility is not archaeological proof. Caves can preserve organic material under certain circumstances, including dry, stable microclimates that inhibit decay. That is why genuine mummies or preserved textiles have been found in sometimes surprising locales. Yet an argument from possibility must never be conflated with confirmation. The presence of a cave system simply makes discovery possible. It does not verify the Arizona Gazette's detailed claims about mummies, Old World-style statuary, or the precise arrangement of artifacts described in the articles. Because the Hopi maintain practices that surround the protection of certain sites, practices reinforced in administrative statements, the ethical dimension is unavoidable. In 2000, the Hopi Cultural Preservation Office issued a statement emphasizing the sacredness of certain locations and requesting that outsiders refrain from public exploration of those places. That request should shape how we speak about and investigate these matters. Curiosity does not trump the rights of a living community to control its sacred narratives and landscapes. Any respectful inquiry, therefore, must accept limits. We neither disclose nor attempt to map specific, Hopi-designated sites within the canyon. We do not encourage treasure-seeking expeditions, and we remain attentive to the possibility that even well-intentioned public disclosure can cause harm. With those guardrails in place, how might we weigh the three strands, Hopi oral memory, the 1909 newspaper story, and the geological possibility, against one another? The answer is inevitably tentative. Here are some possible scenarios, explicitly framed as such. One possibility is that the Arizona Gazette story is largely a product of sensational journalism. Under this scenario, the articles combined an unverified field report, colorful speculation, and the rhetorical currents of their era to create a narrative that captured public attention, but did not reflect an actual excavation with preserved artifacts sent to institutions. The absence of corroborating museum records and photographs would, in this view, be strong evidence against the event's historicity as reported. A second possibility is that a local discovery occurred, perhaps by a private individual or a small group, and that the Arizona Gazette's reporting conflated, exaggerated, or misattributed aspects of that find. In this variation, objects may have been removed and entered private collections. Records may have been kept informally or lost, and institutional oversight may have been absent or incomplete. This would explain both the newspaper's confidence and the archival silence. A third possibility is that Hopi oral memory and the newspaper story are pointing to overlapping features of landscape memory. Both refer in different languages and registers to subterranean spaces that had social meaning and physical presence. In this scenario, The Ant People narrative describes a set of experiences, shelter, supplies, and subterranean refuge, that may reflect real shelters, rock shelters, or cave-like spaces used at certain times in the past. The Arizona Gazette might have encountered a different aspect of that same landscape, or it might have transformed local lore into sensational copy. Importantly, in this reading, we do not demand exact correspondence between clan-held stories and a journalist's list of artifacts. Rather, we accept that human memory and folk accounts can intersect with material archaeology in messy, non-literal ways. A fourth possibility is archival accident. Relevant records existed once but were lost to fire, misplacement, bureaucratic turnover, or private dispersal. Institutional collections from the late 19th and early 20th centuries sometimes suffered such fates. If true, that would mean that the absence of records today tells us less about whether something happened than about the vagaries of preservation. None of these scenarios can be declared definitive on the current public record. What we can say is this: the Hopi traditions deserve to be heard on their own terms. The Arizona Gazette articles are historically interesting and require corroboration, and geological reality makes undiscovered spaces within the canyon plausible. But plausibility is not proof, and respect for Hopi cultural protocols must guide any further action. That raises a final set of questions about what responsible inquiry should look like going forward. First, historians and archaeologists who investigate such claims must follow professional standards, seek primary documentation, evaluate provenance, and insist on verifiable physical evidence before revising broader narratives of prehistory. Second, researchers must center indigenous perspectives, not as convenient sources of clues, but as rights-bearing interlocutors whose cultural knowledge and protections govern how sites are treated. Third, public media and amateur explorers should refrain from speculative treasure hunting and from broadcasting information that might expose sacred places or encourage disrespectful intrusion. There is an essential humility required here. Unsolved mysteries attract confident storytelling, the headline that promises revelation, the photograph that would settle debate, the discovery that would rewrite history. But when dealing with living traditions and fragile landscapes, a different posture is called for: curious attention, rigorous standards, and ethical restraint. Where archival silence exists, it should be met with careful archival work, not with wild conjecture. Where oral tradition is present, it should be acknowledged as a legitimate and valuable form of knowledge that may and often does encode historical memory, while also recognizing that it does not always translate into the categories demanded by modern archaeology. So what did the Hopi know? The most responsible answer is this: the Hopi possess rich, long-standing accounts of subterranean refuge tied to emergence narratives and custodial clan responsibilities, and those accounts describe beings and events that are culturally real for Hopi communities. The April 1909 Arizona Gazette articles reported an underground discovery that, if verified, would have been remarkable. But the public archival record does not presently confirm the article's more extraordinary claims. Whether a real local discovery underlies the newspaper account, whether the story is journalistic invention, or whether both sources point to overlapping aspects of landscape memory remains unresolved. The question in the title, What the Hopi Knew, does not yield a single empirical answer from the available public evidence. Instead, it opens a space for further research conducted in partnership with Hopi custodians, guided by ethical standards and by patient archival and geological inquiry. If this subject intrigues you, and you appreciate evidence-driven explorations of historical puzzles, consider subscribing so we can continue episodes like this one. Before we close, a few practical notes for those who want to learn more responsibly. Read Hopi voices and official Hopi statements where they exist. Look directly at the Arizona Gazette pieces dated April 5th and April 9th, 1909, and consult reputable archaeological and geological literature on Grand Canyon stratigraphy and cave systems for context. When examining sensational claims, prioritize primary sources and verified institutional records, and treat oral traditions with the respect due to living knowledge systems rather than as mere artifacts for debate. In the end, the canyon itself remains a compelling teacher. Its cliffs and hidden hollows hold sedimentary time, human memory, and living spiritual commitments. The tension between what is recorded in print and what is preserved in communal memory is not an anomaly. It is part of how human histories persist. We may never have a single neat answer that connects every dot between the Bear Clan stories and a 1909 newspaper column. But in holding both kinds of testimony side by side, with critical thought, ethical caution, and humility, we gain a richer understanding of how the past lives with the present. Do you think the Hopi oral accounts and the 1909 newspaper story point to the same place or event? Tell us why in the comments. And if you're new here, subscribe to follow further investigations done with care and respect.